I found out my girlfriend was cheating on me, and it changed everything. Hey Reddit, I don't even know where to start with this, but I guess the beginning's as good a place as any. My name's Tyler, and I'm 25. Up until about 6 months ago, I thought I had my life pretty much figured out, or at least as figured out as you can at my age. I had a steady job in IT, a solid group of friends, and a girlfriend I thought was my forever person. Her name was Jessica. Jess and I met at a college party about 3 years ago. She was this wild, free-spirited type who could light up any room she walked into. I was the quieter guy in the corner, nursing a beer and trying to avoid small talk. But she came right up to me, smiled like we'd known each other forever, and asked if I wanted to share a shot of tequila. I don't even like tequila, but for her, I said yes. That night, we ended up talking for hours about everything. Our dreams, our families, the stupid things we did as kids. By the end of it, I was hooked. For a while, everything felt perfect. We moved in together about a year into dating, rented this tiny apartment in Seattle with a view of nothing but the brick wall next door. But I didn't care. Waking up next to her made everything feel like a dream. Then things started to change. First, I didn't think much of it. She got a new job at a marketing firm downtown, and she was constantly talking about how exciting it was. I was proud of her. It felt like a step up for her career. But then she started staying late at work a lot. Deadlines, she'd say. And when she came home, she'd be on her phone more than usual, giggling at texts she wouldn't explain. I tried not to overthink it. Jess had always been a social butterfly, and I didn't want to be the paranoid boyfriend. But there was one night when my gut just flipped. It was a Friday, and she told me she was going out with her coworkers for drinks. I figured, cool, she deserves to unwind. But around midnight, I texted her to ask when she'd be home, and the message didn't deliver. That wasn't like her. When she finally walked through the door around 2 a.m., I noticed her lipstick was smudged, and she smelled faintly of cologne. Not the kind I wear. Had fun? I asked, keeping my voice casual. She froze for a second, then shrugged. Yeah, it was fine. Long night. I'm exhausted. Something about the way she avoided my eyes made my chest tighten. But I didn't push. I wanted to trust her. The turning point came 2 weeks later. I was cleaning the apartment, something Jess usually hated doing, when her laptop chimed with a notification. Out of reflex, I glanced at the screen, and there it was, a message from a guy named Ryan. Ryan, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew I shouldn't invade her privacy, but at that moment, it felt like the universe handed me this truth, daring me to ignore it. I opened the messages. It wasn't just one message. It was a whole thread, weeks of texts, pictures, plans. They'd been meeting up behind my back while I was home waiting for her. My hands were shaking. I don't even know how long I sat there, reading and rereading those messages. Part of me didn't want to believe it. The girl I thought I'd marry had been lying to me. When Jess came home that evening, I confronted her. I'll never forget the look on her face. Shock, guilt, and worst of all, relief. Like a part of her was glad the secret was out. I'm sorry, Tyler, she said, tears streaming down her face. I never meant to hurt you, but I think I've been unhappy for a while. Her words hit me like a truck. Unhappy? We had a life together. A future. How could she throw it all away without even talking to me? She told me she didn't plan for it to happen. That Ryan was just someone who made her feel alive again. As if I hadn't been enough. I packed a bag that night and crashed at my buddy Nick's place. I didn't even look back when I walked out the door. The first few weeks were hell. I replayed every moment of our relationship, wondering where I went wrong. But as time passed, I started to realize something. Jess's betrayal wasn't about me. It was about her. Her insecurities, her inability to communicate, her selfishness. I started focusing on myself. Hitting the gym, reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside. I even started therapy, which honestly was the best decision I've ever made. About 2 months ago, I ran into Jess at a coffee shop. She looked tired, like the weight of her decisions had finally caught up to her. We exchanged a few polite words, but I didn't feel the anger I expected. Just pity. Last I heard, things with Ryan didn't work out. Apparently, cheating doesn't make for a solid foundation. As for me, I'm doing better than ever. I'm still single, but I'm learning to love my own company. And you know what? For the first time in years, I feel free. So yeah, that's my story. If you're going through something similar, just know it gets better. Life has a way of falling apart so it can build itself back up again, stronger than before. After running into Jess at the coffee shop, something strange happened. I didn't just feel pity, I felt closure. For months, I'd been carrying around this weight, this nagging thought that maybe I hadn't been enough. Seeing her, though, I realized that I didn't need her apology or explanation anymore. I didn't need her at all. I remember walking out of that coffee shop and standing on the street, letting the cool autumn air hit my face. It felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I wandered around the city, thinking about all the things I'd put on hold for her. You see, when you're in a relationship, especially one where you give more than you get, you lose parts of yourself. Little things like my love for hiking on weekends or my dream of learning to play guitar were pushed aside because Jess didn't share those interests. It wasn't her fault entirely, I made those choices. But now I had the chance to reclaim them. The next morning, I booked a solo trip to Mount Rainier. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, something I never would have done before. I packed my hiking gear, left a note for Nick, who'd graciously let me crash at his place for way too long, and hit the road. The hike was incredible. There's something about standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at miles of untouched wilderness, that puts life into perspective. Up there, I didn't feel small or insignificant. I felt connected to something bigger than myself. I remember standing at the summit, the wind whipping through my hair, and thinking, this is what it feels like to be alive. When I got back, things started falling into place in a way I didn't expect. I enrolled in a guitar class at a local community center, something I'd been talking about since high school but never actually did. It turned out I wasn't half bad, at least according to the instructor who told me I had a knack for picking up chords. Around the same time, Nick introduced me to his coworker, Emily. She wasn't anything like Jess, and that's what I liked about her. She had this quiet confidence, the kind of person who didn't need to fill silences with meaningless chatter. On our first date, we went to a food truck festival, and she ordered something called a Korean barbecue taco that she swore would change my life. She wasn't wrong. We started seeing each other more often, but I was careful this time. I didn't want to fall into old patterns, losing myself in a relationship. Emily seemed to understand that. She encouraged me to keep hiking, keep playing guitar, keep growing. She even joined me on a few hikes, though she always made me carry the heavier gear, claiming she was too delicate for it. I think she just liked watching me struggle. One night, we were sitting on the couch at her place, watching some terrible rom-com she insisted was a classic, when she asked me about Jess. I hesitated for a moment, then told her everything. The cheating, the heartbreak, the slow climb back to myself. When I finished, Emily didn't say much. She just took my hand and said, "I'm glad you walked away. You deserve better." And for the first time, I actually believed it. Fast forward to today. Emily and I have been together for about a year now, and things are good. Not perfect, because no relationship is, but real, honest. She makes me want to be better, not for her, but for me. As for Jess, she reached out a few weeks ago, sent me a long text apologizing again, saying she'd been doing a lot of soul-searching and wanted to make amends. I thought about responding, but in the end, I didn't. It wasn't out of spite or anger. I just didn't see the point. Some doors are better left closed. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life doesn't stop for heartbreak. It keeps moving, dragging you along whether you're ready or not. But if you lean into it, if you let yourself grow instead of holding on to the pain, you might just find that the future has a way of surprising you. And maybe, just maybe, it's better than you ever imagined. That's the full story. Reddit. Thanks for sticking with me. About 6 months ago, I didn't think I'd be where I am now. Honestly, it's still surreal sometimes. I'll catch myself laughing with Emily, or strumming my guitar on a lazy Sunday, and it hits me. I'm happy. Not the forced kind of happy where you're trying to convince yourself everything's fine, but the real, deep in your bones kind of happy. And the best part? It's not because of someone else. It's because I built this life from the ground up. But, of course, life has a way of throwing curveballs. A few weeks ago, I got an unexpected phone call from Jess's mom. Now, I hadn't spoken to her in years, but we'd always gotten along when Jess and I were together. She was one of those warm, motherly types who made you feel at home the second you walked through the door. When I saw her name pop up on my phone, I hesitated. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Tyler," she said, her voice soft but strained. "I know this is out of the blue, but I need to talk to you." Apparently, Jess was going through a rough patch. She'd moved back home after her thing with Ryan imploded and had been struggling to find her footing ever since. Her mom told me she wasn't the same Jess I'd known. She seemed lost, disconnected. "I think she regrets what happened with you," she added, almost as an afterthought. I didn't know how to respond. On one hand, I felt bad for Jess. Despite everything, I'd never wanted her to suffer. On the other hand, this wasn't my problem anymore. I'd worked hard to move on, to rebuild my life. Was I really supposed to open that door again? I thanked her mom for calling and told her I'd think about it. But the truth was I already knew my answer. That night, I told Emily about the call. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she said something that stuck with me. "You don't owe anyone your peace, Tyler. Not even someone you used to love." She was right. Jess's struggles weren't mine to fix. I wished her well, but I knew reaching out would only drag me back into a place I'd fought so hard to leave behind. Still, the conversation stirred something in me. It reminded me how far I'd come, but also how much I'd learned from the whole ordeal. Jess had taught me some hard lessons about trust, self-worth, and boundaries. And as much as I hated what happened, I couldn't deny that it had shaped me into who I am today. A few days after that call, I got another surprise. An email from a local music shop asking if I'd like to perform at their open mic night. Apparently, my guitar instructor had recommended me. My first instinct was to decline. I'm no John Mayer. But then I thought about that moment on the mountain, when I'd promised myself I'd stop holding back out of fear. So I said yes. The night of the performance, Emily came with me. She sat in the front row, grinning like an idiot and cheering louder than anyone else when I finished my set. I played an original song, something I'd written during one of my lonelier nights after leaving Jess. It was raw, emotional, and a little rough around the edges, but it was mine. And when the audience clapped, I felt a rush of pride I hadn't felt in years. Afterward, Emily wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "Told you you're amazing." It wasn't until later that night, lying in bed with her head resting on my chest, that I realized something. For the first time, I wasn't defined by my past. Jess wasn't a ghost haunting me anymore. She was just a chapter in my story, one that had led me to this moment. I still think about her sometimes, but not with anger or longing. Just a quiet sense of gratitude. She may have broken my heart, but she also taught me how to rebuild it. And for that, I'll always be thankful. So that's where I am now, Reddit. Still figuring things out, still chasing dreams, still learning. But for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what's ahead. And if you're reading this and feeling stuck, just know, it gets better. Promise. Thanks for letting me share my story. And just like that, my tale continues. But this time, I'm writing it on my own terms. As I sit here writing this final update, I can't help but feel a sense of peace. Life has a funny way of throwing you into the deep end, doesn't it? A year ago, I thought my life had fallen apart. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But now, looking back, I see it for what it was, a turning point. A chance to start over, to become the person I was always meant to be. Emily and I are still going strong. She's my rock, my biggest supporter, and honestly, the best thing to ever happen to me. But what makes our relationship different from anything I've ever had is that it's not about completing each other. We're two whole people who choose to share our lives. And that's a beautiful thing. A few weeks ago, I played another open mic night at the same little music shop. This time, I wasn't nervous. I was excited. I played a mix of covers and original songs, and when I finished, a guy from the audience came up to me and asked if I'd ever thought about starting a band. It felt like one of those serendipitous moments, you know? Like the universe was giving me a nudge. We've since started jamming together, and who knows? Maybe this will turn into something bigger. As for Jess, I haven't heard from her again. I hope she's doing okay. I hope she finds whatever she's looking for. But more importantly, I hope she learns to face her own demons instead of running from them. That's not a lesson I can teach her. It's one she'll have to figure out on her own. In the end, though, this story isn't about Jess. It's about me. It's about how I took something painful and turned it into an opportunity to grow. It's about learning to love myself, flaws and all. And it's about realizing that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can be the best thing that ever happened for you. So here I am, Reddit, stronger, wiser, and finally truly happy. If you're reading this and you're going through something similar, just remember, the pain doesn't last forever. It feels all-consuming at first, but one day, you'll wake up and realize it's not as heavy as it once was. And before you know it, you'll be living a life you never thought possible. Thanks for coming along on this journey with me. Your support, your advice, and even just your willingness to listen have meant more than you'll ever know. This chapter of my life is finally closed, but the story's far from over. Here's to new beginnings. Stay strong, Reddit. You've got this. And with that, my story is complete.